Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sunday morning at the Marxist Library. My name is Sharon, and I will be moderating today. In pre-pandemic times, this weekly program was hosted by the Institute for the Critical Study of Society, ICSS, at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland, California, USA. During the pandemic, we have been meeting digitally on Zoom. When the library reopens for in-person meetings, we intend to continue being online as well, what Zoom calls hybrid meetings. So we should be telling everyone good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, because we now have participants from throughout the US and around the world. I'm a member of the planning committee that organizes these sessions, maintains the website, icss.org, posts on our YouTube channel, ICSS Marxist, and keeps our financial records. For over a decade, Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library has been a platform for diverse presentations on political economy, socialism, communism, the fight against racism and imperialism, the environment, in short, anything that Marxists want to talk about. We always welcome your feedback and suggestions. Today, we have Rick Sterling, who is a journalist and an activist, especially on international issues. And he's going to address the pressing issue of what's going on in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Rick, did you want to speak first and then introduce your video? Is that how that's?
Yes, please, Sharon.
Okay, so you have the floor, and then we will have an intermission before questions and answers in order to update you on some things about our program. So without further ado, Rick.
Well, thanks very much, Sharon, and it's nice to be at the Marxist Library again. I wrote earlier in the week, I actually spent an afternoon writing down a few facts about the conflict in Ukraine. This was before Russia intervened or sent troops across the border. And subsequently, it was that night that Russia sent troops across the border and attacked Ukrainian military installation. So I did an update on the article, and it's published as how the U.S. instigated the Ukraine crisis. It's at antiwar.com, Dissident Voice, LA Progressive, and other sites. So I recommend people to look at that. But I thought I've been looking into the issue closely, especially over the last few days, and I came across a very good 20-minute presentation by Professor John Mearsheimer, and I'd like to start with that because I think he lays out very well the context. And then after that, I'll be talking about various other aspects to it. So,
good. Scientist who has made
so I think for people who want to look it up, that's anybody who is there an easy way, Ellen, to share the link to that video so anybody who wants to see it can?
Yeah, I will put it in the chat.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, so in that video, it's very nice because Mearsheimer lays out the sequence of events leading up to the event. Now that event took place on February 21st, so it was a few days before the Russian sent their troops into Ukraine. But he very clearly lays out the fact that the crisis has been created by the expansion of NATO. In the early 90s, there were of course the promises to the Soviet Union that NATO would not expand east. The Warsaw Pact broke up and no longer was there. So the question was, well, what is the use of NATO? Rather than breaking up or just continuing as it was. It has steadily expanded over the years, taking in numerous countries that were part of the Soviet Union. And then in 2000, including Romania and Poland, and then in 2008, NATO declared they intended to add Ukraine and Georgia to the NATO alliance. The NATO alliance, of course, is a military alliance. It's very much led and directed by the United States. And it's not an economic alliance, it's not a cultural alliance, it's a military alliance. So the question is, who are they opposed to? Who would they have a military confrontation with? And the answer is clearly Russia and potentially China as well. But of course, China is not in the Atlantic. China is in the Pacific. But Colombia is an ally, or it's not a formal member, but it's one of the allies of NATO, the formal allies, and they work together closely. So the sequence of events was that the NATO expanded through various countries. Then in 2008, they explicitly said they wanted to include Ukraine and Georgia. Georgia made moves made a military move to suppress Russian-speaking people in part of Georgia, and very quickly Russia sent in troops and defeated them. And so that area of Russia, or that area of Georgia rather, is under the control of effectively a secessionist group. Now, in that situation carried on to 2014, where there was finally a coup took place in the Ukraine. The situation developed over the fall, where there were protests at the Maidan, the main central square in Kiev, Ukraine, the capital of Ukraine, and the protests. Some of the protesters undoubtedly were well-meaning. They were protesting against corruption, but there were also far-right elements, including neo-Nazi elements, explicitly neo-Nazi elements, and they had the very strong support of neocons and hawks in the United States. John McCain went to the Maidan along with Victoria Nuland. So you've got official endorsement from the highest levels of the United States. We can just imagine what would be the response if some Russian political leaders came to the United States and supported a political protest against the government. Obviously, it would not be allowed. But nevertheless, that is what happened in the fall of 2013 in Kiev. That was followed by, it wasn't just passing out sandwiches and giving visible encouragement, but later on, Victoria Nuland revealed that the U.S. had spent $5 billion over the previous 15 or 18 years, quote unquote, support democracy in Ukraine. Very clearly, their version of democracy is creating a government that's very friendly to the United States. The situation escalated, and then in mid-February, just as the Sochi Winter Olympic Games were drawing to a close, or were approaching a close in Russia, you had an incident that's violence occurred, whereby shooters on top of a building. It was later determined they were shooting both the police and the military and the counter-protesters as well as the protesters. And something like 100 people died in the violence there. That precipitated the final coup where they overturned the government, and the President Yanukovych fled for his life. Probably many people have heard about or they've listened to the audio recording of a phone call between the US ambassador to Ukraine and Victoria Nuland, where they talk about their strategy and who was going to be in the government after the government was overthrown. And of course, that is exactly the way it turned out. That's pretty solid proof that the US was managing the uprising and controlling it. I believe that just as there were the open forces of the United States sending money and giving visible support and making statements and so forth, the dark forces of the United States, i.e. the CIA and other elements, were undoubtedly there, very active as well. And I think they may have had a hand in the violence that took place where people were killed just prior to the overthrow of the government. So that was in 2014. In February 22 of 2014. What happened after that was the very next day when the coup government was installed, the very first day of operation. They said that Russia would no longer be an official language of Ukraine, and took other measures that showed their hostility to Russia, and the fact that they didn't want a country that was neutral or was recognizing the Russian speaking people of the country, or a moderate kind of government that was able to get along with both Europe and the United States, and as well as Russia. It was a hardcore right-wing U.S. looking government, and they took actions against that were seen as attacks by all the Russian-speaking population. So subsequently, the people in Crimea quickly arranged a referendum and decided they wanted to reunify with Russia. Crimea had been part of Russia since Catherine the Great in the 1780s, and that had only been put under the administration of Ukraine when they were all in the Soviet Union in the 1950s. So they had much more of a Russian heritage than they did a different Ukrainian heritage. So the vote was overwhelming in favor of reunifying with Russia, and they proceeded to do that. There was basically no violence. There was already a Russian military base there that it was in existence, so Russia didn't have any need to send armed forces, because there were already armed forces there. But there was no violence in any case, because the will of the population was overwhelmingly in favor of Russia and against the coup in Kiev. In the so-called Donbass region of Ukraine in the east, there were the people also have a very strong Russian heritage. Russian is the first language of the majority of the population, and they also objected to the coup. And so basically we had ultimately the secession of Luhansk and Donetsk provinces of Ukraine. That's continued to this day. So we've had 8 years since that went on. So we've had conflict in the Donbass, in the Luhansk and Donetsk provinces. They've said that they're withdrawing from Ukraine. And just the other day, President Putin of Russia declared they were basically acknowledging the independence they were recognizing the independence of those states. I think we've got a lot of very difficult questions that are that are presented in this situation. I think many people were surprised at the invasion by Russian forces into Ukraine. And there's another very good article here, and I'm gonna refer to it. It's by Jack Rasmus, and the article is called 10 Reasons Why U.S. Elites May Want Russia to Invade Ukraine. So that was written in January, but he makes a lot of excellent, it's a long article. I recommend people look it up. But I'm going to just read some of the points that he makes that show aspects of this that are worth thinking about, and then his conclusion. So 10 reasons. So the question is, has Russia fallen into a trap? The same way that Iraq fell into a trap when it invaded Kuwait and thought it had an agreement from the U.S. when Kuwait was siphoning the oil underground. They were doing diagonal drilling and stealing the resources of Iraq. And Iraq thought they had an understanding from the U.S. that they wouldn't do anything, so the Iraqi forces, of course, went into Kuwait, and then the U.S. mounted a huge campaign called Desert Storm. So anyway, here are some of the reasons why U.S. elites may want Russia to invade Ukraine. This was written in January. Reason number one, to reunite NATO and strengthen U.S. hegemony over it once again. That's pretty much, we're seeing that in the short term happen. Number two was to get Germany to cancel the Nord Stream 2 Russian gas pipeline. Get Europe to buy U.S. gas instead. Reason three, create an excuse to send still more troops and advanced weaponry to the Baltics. Reason four, obtain more economic concessions from Ukraine for U.S. business in exchange for more and better U.S. NATO arms. Reason five, grow U.S. political support to go after Moldova, to drive out Russian supporters and install a U.S. puppet regime. Reason six, to justify more U.S. effort and funding to try to destabilize Belarus and Kazakhstan. Reason seven, provide major foreign policy distraction for the Democratic Party before November 22 election. Possible reason number eight, to get Congress to approve further increase in U.S. defense budget. Possible reason nine, excuse to go after pro-Russian supporters like Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Reason number 10, to test the effectiveness of latest U.S. weaponry against Russian forces and Russian weaponry. So, and he concludes, it'll take me a couple of minutes to read this, but I think it's worth our all hearing and later on discussing. Time will reveal whether Russia and Putin also favor an open conflict in Ukraine, or whether the Western media is exaggerating the real Russian threat and beating the drums of imminent invasion to serve the interests and various objectives of the US and NATO. Longer term, Russia may have no alternative but to invade, should the US play its final card and move to bring Ukraine into NATO. The U.S. says it has no such intention, but if so, why does it refuse to withdraw its declaration of a decade ago that Ukraine and NATO is the goal at some point? Is the future now? Once Ukraine joins NATO, it is game over for Russia strategically for decades to come. Similar developments like Ukraine eventually would occur in Belarus, Kazakhstan, and likely Moldova. Calls and efforts to bring them too into NATO would similarly follow. Russia will have been outflanked. It will be thereafter more easily intimidated. Surrounded by NATO states everywhere, what likely would follow would be a US-NATO demand of a full-scale nuclear disarmament by Russia. This writer, that's Jack Rasmus, believes therefore that preventing NATO from entering Ukraine is a red line for Putin and Russia. If pushed into a corner with no retreat or way out, it is quite possible Russia may see no alternative to invading. That's not on the immediate agenda, but that's to not say it will never be. So that was pretty prescient, I think. I mean, actually, Putin has been very clear. If we look back to their proposed agreements that they laid out in December, they were saying very explicitly, this is a red line for us. And they were, in effect, demanding that the U.S. withdraw its intention to bring Ukraine into NATO. Even as Ukraine is not a member of NATO now, it's not a formal member, but the United States and NATO allies have been sending weapons, advisors, and treating Ukraine as a NATO force in a lot of respects. So it's apparent that this is an extreme move by Russia. I think it's been carefully thought out. I think it was carefully planned, and time will tell whether they've fallen into a trap by the West, or whether they have prepared things enough and considered things enough that they're going to be able to avoid that, to avoid all of the negative consequences that we were hearing predicted. I think what I've seen in terms of what I've seen from Russia over the last 10 or 15 years, especially in Syria and the Middle East as well as elsewhere, is that they are very astute and very cautious. They did enough to prevent the collapse of the Assad government in Syria, but they've tolerated the U.S. Staying in Syria. They haven't forced a confrontation there. And the fact that they went into Afghanistan, they fell into the trap that Brzezinski set, and it was very proud of doing. They suffered huge losses, and that contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Union. So one has to think that they are very aware of the dangers of getting in an occupation and being attacked on a daily basis, especially by a country that has national pride and national sentiment, and the tendency will be to oppose any intruding force. I think the question is what will happen in the days and weeks and months ahead. I think the disaster scenario is that we start on the slippery slope where Russia has invaded Ukraine, and that the U.S. and NATO start challenging Russia more and more, and Russia fights back. Of course, it's possible that we could, the Armageddon could come to us if we think about the disaster scenarios. And it seems foolish to discount that very real danger and possibility. I think another disaster scenario, another bad scenario, is that the Russian forces will get bogged down, that the militias that have been trained by the CIA, and this was documented by Yahoo News, that the CIA has been training militias, some of whom are Nazi ideology, since 2015. But there's the possibility of this being dragged out the same way that the U.S. has dragged out the conflict in Syria and prevented the Assad government from achieving a victory, and stolen the resources and weakened the country with sanctions, and maintained a secessionist force of jihadis in Syria, the same kind of protracted struggle the U.S. could see as a good thing. Ukrainians dying, Russians dying, and the U.S. in the back just selling more and more arms, transferring more and more arms and money that is stolen from the citizens of the United States, just to weaken Russia. I think that's a real danger. To my mind, the good scenario will be if Zelensky comes to an agreement with Russia very soon, and so that the invasion stops and the Russian forces leave. Exactly how they're going to formalize the demilitarization and the de-Nazification is an important question. But I think just an agreement that Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO, that their militarization through NATO military advisors and so forth, and weapons is going to stop, that Ukraine would be a neutral force that's not under the thumb of either the US or Russia. I think that would be, that's to my mind, that's definitely the best thing that could happen in this situation. David Harvey, the Marxist anthropologist from the UK, he's got a good article at Common Dreams, and referring to the massive international protests before the U.S. invaded Iraq. Of course, the U.S. went on to invade Iraq. Up to a million Iraqis died in that invasion. But we need to my mind, we need to mount a massive international campaign in the U.S. and internationally against, not just against the Russian troops or the calling for peace. We need to call for peace in Ukraine, and we need to stop the advance, and we need to stop the advance and expansion of NATO. And it's essential that there be an understanding, an explicit understanding that the situation that we have here, the nightmare situation, is caused by NATO expansion. So I think I'll leave it at that, and for now, and I'm sure we'll get into other aspects from here.
Thank you very much, Rick. And we're going to have at least an hour of Q&A and discussion. But before we do that, I want to do two things. One is to ask Alan to talk about the next program that's coming up next week. Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Next week, I'll be speaking on the COVID pandemic, kind of giving people an update of what's going on and an analysis. It'll be 2 years since the start of the pandemic, talking about a political economic analysis of recent developments. Should be a good program. So that's it. Following that, we have a couple of programs in the making. So go to our website, ICSSmarks.org, sign up for our mailing list if you want to be notified, and you can always see what the upcoming programs are at our website. So we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Alan. I'd like to recommend that people who share our link with their friends, you should ask your friends to subscribe directly to our mailing list instead of depending on you to share the link. And that's for security reasons. So the more people that just get the link directly from our website, it's much more secure. So before we go into the Q&A, Richard Fallenbaum, would you like to say something about our fundraising needs?
Yes, thank you. I can't show my video, but at any rate, we have certain expenses from in the ICSS and Sunday morning at the Marxist Library, and also we support the physical library in Oakland, which has our physical home. And so I'd like to invite everybody who hasn't already to contribute, preferably on a monthly or regular basis. You can set it up that way. There's information on our website, icssmarks.org, and actually a button on our website which you can contribute. And also for those of you who received the email announcements, they're also on that information on that document. So looking forward to your contributions, and thank you in advance.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm going to start calling on people. And the way we're going to do this is when I call on you, I will ask you to unmute. And then that will pop up on your screen and you can unmute yourself. Okay, so we have a number of people with their hands up, and I'm going to try to keep the stack accurate. First is Janet, followed by Trajan NY, followed by Yusuf.
Shall I go?
Go ahead.
Hi. So thank you, Rick, and thanks for this event. I wanted to post something in the chat, and I couldn't. Instead, I emailed it to Jean and Rick, and it has to do with I'm being blocked from accessing RT.com. There was as of today, there was an article titled "Ukraine Agrees to Hold Talks with Russia in Belarus, Moscow." And I wasn't able to read it. I get a security and performance by DDoS-guard window that says, "We have registered suspicious traffic coming from your network. Using this page, we will be able to determine that you are not a robot." And I attached a screenshot of that. I got it on both my Safari and my Firefox browsers. So something's going on there. They're starting to not let us view alternative voices in this. I also watched Oliver Stone's 2016 documentary, Ukraine on Fire. I've watched it twice in the last week or so. I had no problem watching it, and actually I looked to see if I could watch it today, and I get another window from YouTube. That one's on YouTube, and it's like a censor kind of thing. You have to say you're an adult and whatever. I haven't gone through the whole thing, but so they're starting to censor stuff and block stuff. Just wanted to let you all know. So that's the main thing. If I could, well, I'd like to post it to the chat, but I can't. So I'm done.
Okay.
Yeah, I could comment very briefly. I mean, I'm able to access RT.com from my own computer, but there are different. I could see that different outlets may be filtering or restricting or doing something else depending on who your internet server is. I'm seeing the latest news at RT is that the European Commission has announced that the EU will ban the Russian media outlets RT and Sputnik. So that is, and they're accusing them of spreading quote unquote harmful disinformation. So we've all been aware of this. I used to like watching RT on my cable, Comcast cable network, and it was about 3 or 4 years ago where it ended. On December 31st, it suddenly was no longer there.
That's right.
And then I looked into it and I found out that the McCain amendment to the National Defense Authorization included a provision that eliminated the requirement that cable companies not restrict things for political reasons. So the Congress made laws which enabled that banning in effect.
Yeah, I was talking about the website also, not just the channel. Right.
Right. Yeah.
As Raj indicates in the chat, it might be the different browsers. So if anybody has any understanding of which browsers are better in terms of not censoring, you could put that in the chat to answer what Raj put in there. I'm going to call next on Trajan, NY.
Well, I think the first step of Armageddon is starting because Putin authorized the strategic nuclear missiles high priority right now. So they've been activated. So that's a real dangerous situation that this war is starting. And also I read that, Biden's proposing $350 million worth of weapons going into Ukraine, and that the parliament in Russia gave authorization to do precision strikes on any carriers of these weapons. So definitely an escalation's coming. Also, I don't believe that Zelensky will be able to get a deal. You know why? Because the right sector is way up high in the Ukrainian military. Dmitry Yanush is the head of right sector, and he's been promoted right up to the top. And they don't want an agreement. They want to continue this war. They're fanatical neo-Nazis, and the U.S. has been training them, using the CIA, training these Nazis to attack eastern Ukraine. This whole problem has been created by the U.S., but the mass media is censored it out. And another thing I heard on the news today, CNN said Zelensky's Jewish. There's no fascists, but they never mentioned Azov Battalion, the right sector, or the Baidar Battalion, and all the neo-Nazis there. Just because Zelensky's Jewish doesn't mean there's no Nazis there. And they're forcing him into a lot of this. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Next is Yusuf, followed by Jean and Bill Dors. Sorry, Yusuf. There you go. You're muted.
Okay. Thank you for the good presentation. I think I'd like some more comments about the violation of the 1994 Budapest Agreement, where Ukraine agreed to be neutral, that the U.S. and Western powers and the Russian Federation would guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty in exchange for Ukraine dismantling Soviet-era nuclear missiles. So I think the Ukraine entering NATO is a violation of the 1994 Budapest Agreement. Also, the protests after anti-Maidan protests in Odessa were put down by neo-Nazis, and actually people were burned inside a trade union building. Let me make the further comment that Eastern Ukraine, which is mostly Russian-speaking, Eastern Ukraine and the coasts, these were made part of Ukraine partly because to give it a more proletarian character, a more working class character, whereas Western Ukraine is mainly agricultural. I mean, the Soviets felt that this would strengthen the left by the working class, and it was in these areas. Not only it's not only ethnic, but also there's also a social factor. Um, I'd like your comments, and also finally, I visited Kiev just before Glasnost and Perestroika, and it was a wonderful place. All sorts of languages were. You could hear all sorts of languages in the park. That was the main entertainment, and nearly all signs were bilingual in Ukrainian and Russian. I think really the restoration of something resembling the Soviet Union is the only solution. And with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, you have all these horrible conflicts in Azerbaijan, Armenia, elsewhere in Transnistria, in Moldova. It really opened up a can of worms that the Soviet Union had managed very well. Okay, so these are my comments, and I'd be happy to hear Rick's response.
Thank you, Yusuf. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks very much, Yusuf. Of course, Ukraine had nuclear weapons, and as part of the breakup of the Soviet Union, there were a lot of negotiations between Ukraine, Russia, and the US and others, and so they were disarmed. They basically no longer, they had the nuclear weapons removed. Actually, the weapons were there, the keys, but the ability to launch them was in Moscow. But I'm very interested to hear that Ukraine possibly being part of NATO, it would be a violation of the Budapest 1994 agreement. So I'll thanks for that tip. I'll be looking into that. What we have, what has transpired and has gotten a little more publicity are the agreements in 2014 and 2015 following the coup, the so-called Minsk Agreements 1 and 2, which they were conducted under the auspices of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, as well as Germany and France, with Russia and with Kiev and with representatives of the breakaway regions. Those agreements were a way to solve the crisis, to maintain the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but to give a measure of autonomy to those regions. What's happened is that the agreement number 1 in 2014 and agreement number 2 in 2015, they were signed, they were agreed to, but Kiev has never followed through. They've never carried out their side of the agreement. Clearly, elements in Kiev and elements in Washington don't want to see an agreement. And that, I think that underscores the overall situation here, where Washington is controlling things and is happy to see Ukrainians dying and Russians dying to weaken Russia. I think geostrategically that's what's at play. If the U.S. could bring in Ukraine as a full NATO member and further threaten Russia, they would be happy. But in the meantime, they're content to make sure that the situation is not resolved readily, and that this damages and weakens Russia in many respects.
Okay, Jean, you're next in the queue, followed by Bill Doors and Richard W.
Okay, I believe I'm unmuted.
Yes.
So yeah, I have a couple of things I wanted to say on this. And again, I did speak last week. We had the Putin, Xi Jinping discussion, and so people can refer back to that. But I have 2 points I want to make. First of all, I'm in Vets for Peace, as everyone knows, and our chapter, East Bay chapter, did pass a resolution, which, among other things, said that our slogan should be bring our troops home from Europe and everywhere else. Secondly, US out of Eurasia. And third, abolish NATO. And I think that's the pathway to peace right now. But there's another issue I want to talk about just briefly. It's just people are regarding this as a great power confrontation. I think Nishimmer adopts that perspective. He's an international relations person. But as a Marxist, I think we need to understand the deeper roots of this in terms of the struggle between capitalism, imperialism, and socialism. And it goes back to 1917, October. And the US sent troops immediately to put down the October Revolution. They continued that in various forms since then. It's been a major, and that's why we have nuclear weapons. The United States invented them to attack Russia, communism. So I think that's very important to keep this point in mind. And after World War II, we had a bipolar world, US imperialism on one side and the Soviet Union on the other. And I think it's important to remember one is imperialism that seeks the expansion and, if necessary, destruction of all forms of struggle. And the other is socialist, growing out of the October Revolution and the Communist International. So I just wanted to throw that out. And if you you want a more eloquent discussion of that, which I just watched yesterday, is Abby Martin and Brian Becker of the PSL. Have a good session on that, about 2 hours, I think. And I'll try to find it, but you can find it also on Google, I think. Mm-hmm. So thank you. And anything, be interested in what Rick has to say on this.
Rick, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. One, I endorse Gene's recommendation of that discussion by Abby Martin with Brian Becker. I also thought it was very, very good. Regarding the struggle between capitalism and imperialism versus socialism, I think it's significant that Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Syria, they've all come out supporting the Russian intervention in Ukraine, because I think they have been under the heel of the U.S. for so long, that they have paid the price and they know what's at stake. I mean, there was a good tweet yesterday where Ben Norton was saying that there's been more publicity about the invasion of Ukraine in one day than there was over 3 years of the Saudi invasion of Yemen. It's not 3 years, 5. Contrasting it, because there is an information war at play here as well. Huge amount of pressure, but I think it's clear that there's this is a hugely important event. If we think back to the meeting between the Chinese Foreign Ministry and Blinken in Anchorage, Alaska, where the Chinese finally just flat out said, enough, stop lecturing it to us. Who are you to be lecturing to anybody? And now, if you read Putin's speech from a few days ago, at the beginning of this action, this military action, he called it, it's very clear. He lays it all out, how they've been attacked, how they're feeling in a corner, and how all of their efforts to peacefully resolve this have been rebuffed, and meanwhile, the empire has attacked any number of countries, whether it's Yugoslavia or Iraq or Syria or Libya or wherever, with complete impunity. And it looks like a line has been drawn in the sand that, we're in a very dangerous place, that things could go in a much better way for everybody in the world except imperialists, or things could spin out of control. So I think it's really important that we all speak out, and we clearly identify that the media is just saying that the problem is that Russia invaded Ukraine. That NATO is the root of the problem. NATO expansion and threats on Russia is the root of the problem, in my opinion.
Thank you. Next is Bill Doris, followed by Richard W. and Larry. Go ahead, Bill. Oh, I have to ask you to unmute. Sorry.
Hey, thank you. I think there's no doubt that the United States ruling class wants this war for the reasons that Rick laid out. And the only reason the US wants to expand NATO into the former Soviet Union is for war. Is to destroy Russia, frankly, to destroy the Eurasian economic bloc, to destroy China, Venezuela. I mean, ultimately, this is coming. The question is, did Russia have a choice? Do they have a choice, or is it fighting now or fighting later in a more unfavorable circumstance? Since the eastern region, since Donetsk and Luhansk declared independence in 2014, they've been under nonstop attack and bombardment by Ukrainian fascist militias and military paid by the United States. 14,000 people have been killed. It's like the Gaza Strip. And it was only last week that Russia finally recognized them as being independent republics. There were 100,000 Ukrainian troops massed to attack. They began hostilities before Russia went in. So people say, well, why didn't Russia just go in to defend Donetsk and Luhansk? Well, if they had done that, the scream of invasion would be just as loud, but then they would be targets for all the new missiles and weaponry the US has given Ukraine. Now, hopefully most of that's been taken out. It's really a struggle between imperialism and economic development, I see, even more than socialism, because only war can keep the can preserve the obsolescent status of the US ruling class, Wall Street, and the dollar at the center of the world economy. I want to convey a couple of other resources. I think the best one available in this country is called Solidarity with Novorossiya and the Anti-Fascists in Ukraine, which is organized by Greg Butterfield, who's been to Donbass several times. And it provides a voice for the freedom fighters, for the anti-fascist resistance in Donbass, who are fighting alongside the Russian army. And also this afternoon at 5 o'clock, some activists in Baltimore are showing the film Ukraine on Fire, along with commentary by Greg Butterfield. And I put the link in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. People can now unmute themselves. So next up is Richard W. Richard? Okay.
Yay. First off, thank you, Rick, for your nice presentation. I had a couple of things I wanted to bring up. One, one thing I wanted to suggest before I get to that is right now my thing is showing that the chat is disabled. Can you maybe at least enable it so that people can send chats to the host, so they can, so we get things like links and that kind of stuff. The second thing is that I just went on and on my browser, and I went on RT, and where Elon Musk is going to send help internet connections to Ukraine, our buddy Elon Musk. So I think it's really comes down to who your provider as far as internet access. Okay, so one thing I wanted to bring up is that you left out the fact that Chris Murphy, who is currently a senator from Connecticut and a Democrat, was on that stage along with McCain, both of whom, had they been over here in the United States on January 6th of last year, would have been taken to task for inciting riots to go and overthrow the government. So I think that that should be, and not only that, but Chris Murphy has now become the darling of mainstream media. I've seen him several times being interviewed as an expert on matters of Ukraine. The second thing is that Yusef mentioned the burning of trade unionists down in Odessa, 30 to 50. What was left out of that was, I think it was Bill Casey, the CIA, who was in Kiev like a day before all that happened. So there's some speculation that he, who was also another favorite of mainstream media, helped orchestrate that. I wanted to take a little bit of umbrage with your, or maybe I misunderstood, with NATO. I think NATO is more than just a quote defense alliance. I think it's also a place where I think it acts as a weapons manufacturer. It's almost like a transnational weapons factory, where you can where it is engaged in selling vis-a-vis the Russians. Fourth point that I wanted to bring up is I've been seeing a lot of these petitions about Ukraine, and some have taken Putin to task, and some have criticized the U.S. government. What I haven't seen, and I think really should be incorporated in these things, is a criticism of mainstream media. In this country, mainstream media is known as the fourth estate. It is the freedom of press is there to hold government accountable. It's not there to repeat endlessly government talking points. And yet that's exactly what's going on. And so we should be as much against we should criticize the mainstream media for being irresponsible in their governmental responsibilities. And I'm not a Pollyanna here. I know damn well that they represent capitalist interests. But nevertheless, I mean, we should be including that talking point, that we should be criticizing the mainstream media for not presenting unbiased news. Not like that's going to happen. Is it time? Okay.
Yeah, you've over time, but thank you. We're trying to limit our comments to 2 minutes, and
yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. I understand.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next is Larry, followed by Leslie and Norma.
Yes, I was listening to KQED in the middle of the night the other night. They had this author who I was asleep, half asleep, so I don't know. But he had written a book, and he said that there's a big pool or whatever field of natural gas under Ukraine. I haven't seen that anywhere else. And he said specifically, in like 100 articles, I've never seen anybody mention that this natural gas exists, which would be a big potential conflict with Russia if it's true. Does anybody know about that?
Rick, do you want to comment?
No, I haven't heard that, Larry.
Okay.
May I say something to that? I believe I have read something, Larry, in the same lines that Ukraine was the #1 source of gas to Europe before Russia came in with cheaper and more gas. So there is a tremendous conflict there that is brewing up. Yes, and it comes up right at the time when the gas prices are rising. Thank you.
Yeah. One thing I can say is that right now Europe is getting gas from Russia via through pipes that go through Ukraine. So it's Russian gas, and it may be that you're correct that there's some Ukrainian natural gas in there as well. But the Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 2 will be a route that completely bypasses Ukraine, so Ukraine will not make their surcharges. So that definitely would be they will definitely be hoping for the suspension or the stopping of Nord Stream 2. If I could comment on Richard's comments briefly, I'm very interested to hear that about Chris Murphy. Of course, there does need to be pressure on him because he's been very bad on Venezuela as well. And he is, you're right, he is influential, and he's a name that's in the media. Regarding NATO, it's not an offensive factory, but NATO in 2006 they came to a decision that all NATO countries would spend 2% of each nation's gross domestic product on military. That's not 2% of their budget, 2% of their GDP, a huge amount. Of course, the U.S. spends more than that, more than 3% of our GDP on weapons, but NATO as a military alliance puts demands that are beneficial to the military complex, which the U.S. is a major component of. Regarding the media, I think you're exactly correct. I think it's very important to criticize the mainstream media, to send them letters letting you know when you hear things you think are false. I think it's not just the mainstream media. There's some prominent broadcasters on KPFA radio who are, frankly, they're Russophobic. I think I do know where they've imbibed this hate Russia feeling, but they bring on the same guests all the time who spout the same stuff. And the main thing about my article that I started off wanting to do was saying these are well-proven facts about the coup, about the U.S. support for the coup, the Minsk Agreements, and so forth. And any discussion of Ukraine that completely ignores those, it's an indication that there's disinformation and bias going on. But I do think it's important that we progressives and internationalists communicate to KPFA, which is supposed to be the alternative station. Of course, there's some great stuff on KPFA, but unfortunately, there's some stuff that's not so great or even bad that we should express our views about.
Okay, Leslie, you're next. Go ahead, Leslie.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. This has been a really useful discussion for me. But I have two questions. One is, tell me if I have misunderstood or misinterpreted, but I get this feeling that some people are talking as if Russia is still socialist. Sort of like, how could you restore the USSR when Russia is capitalist? I mean, it's just outright capitalist now. And my other question is just to ask what y'all's assessment is of the peace demonstrations in Russia.
Rick, did you want to comment on that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Russia has capitalistic elements to their economy too, but they have public health care. They have a big state sector, and I think there are the roots of socialism there. A lot of people in Russia, they don't want to go back to the Soviet days, but they have fond memories of the positive aspects. Of course, the Communist Party is the second largest party in terms of popularity. So I think I think it's really different than the Western capitalist states. And as much as they have defended the UN Charter, there needs to be that is very China and Russia challenging U.S. supremacy. I think is really it's the battle of our era. Whether it's going to be a U.S. supremacy and hegemony is going to continue running the world, invading other countries at will with complete impunity, or whether there's going to be a change. And as much as I think it's true that Russia's invasion here is a violation of international law and the UN Charter, I think that their back's against the wall. I think they are only doing this because they feel they have no choice, and otherwise they are standing up. Both Russia and China and the non-aligned countries, the BRICS, they're trying to stand up for the UN Charter and international law, I feel, and I do think that's the primary conflict in the world today, whether U.S. hegemony is going to continue.
What about the peace demonstrations in Russia that I was asking about? What do you think about those?
Well, it's not surprising. I think there's memories of Afghanistan, and the Russian soldiers who died in a foreign land, and it was not successful. And I'm sure there are people there who are wondering, well, was this the right thing to do? Wasn't there an alternative? And that's a reasonable question, and there needs to be explanation. I think in Putin's speech, he interestingly enough, he draws the analogy to World War II. And as we all know, the Western media always compares, it's appeasement, it's Neville Chamberlain, and Putin is the new Hitler. Well, from Putin's perspective, there's an international aggressor equivalent to Nazi Germany, but it's the U.S. And he recounts the history of invasions of the U.S. And he says in World War II, they tried to appease Germany until Germany ended up attacking the Soviet Union directly in 1941. He says in his speech, we should have, delaying the conflict, which was inevitable, was very disadvantageous for us. And of course, they ended up losing 27 million people. But I think, well, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Norma, then Raj, then Kit or Rich. Go ahead, Norma.
Yeah, I couldn't unmute myself. You said we could all unmute ourselves, and I couldn't unmute myself. I also can't post to the chat.
Okay, we'll ask.
And I appreciate the problems we're having. I just wanted you to know that that's going on. Did I do something wrong again, Sharon?
No, I was saying that we'll ask our tech person to look into that.
Okay.
Because we believed that everybody was unmuted and could write in the chat.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, now you know. It's come up more often since I put my hand up that we have to look at the disinformation that is constantly coming out of even what appear to be supporters or where we'd expect supporters. People just don't have the slightest idea of what's going on. People are unable, for one thing, to sort good guys from bad guys or good behavior from bad behavior and to stand up for it. The Russian invasion was the good guys doing a good thing, regardless of all the do's and don'ts that have been written into documents, but that have not been held to for the past 100 years. You know, the Soviet Union, the Russians have been under attack for the past 100 years without let up. Afghanistan is an example. The Russians were forced into, well, no, the hegemonic, because of two words at the same time. The imperialist forces have been pushing on Afghanistan since 1953. And I have a whole list of that. Dore, what's his name? Bill Doris started it, mentioning something about it's not just about NATO, it's about the whole, and I forget the words he used because I have been writing down it's anti-socialism that's the cause. I'd like to hear what he said again.
Okay. Okay.
That's
move on.
much.
Thank you. Next is Raj.
Okay.
Go ahead, Raj.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. I read your article and I thought this is good, and I'm glad that you're able to come. So I agree with Leslie that Russia is not a socialist country and capitalist interests are involved, but the problem here is primarily the US attempt to encircle both China and Russia. So Russia in this case is, and Russia cannot afford to have Ukraine anything but neutral. And so the problem here is that the attack is an international violation of law. Of course, the United States does it all the time. So I'm not that disturbed that they had to do. The greater problem is that it'll kill, obviously it'll kill civilians like you pointed out, Donbass, that has been going on, and close to 15,000 people have been killed. And probably close to 1 million have actually immigrated to Russia in order to escape that. So I think that by far the biggest culprit here is the United States. And the European powers are nothing but they basically work at the instance of the United States. So they don't have independent life as far as this is concerned. But the question here is really the difficulty is that civilians are dying, suffering is happening, there is exodus, and then anti-Russian feeling is being generated. United States, that is being generated, but I'm talking in that area. And yet, I don't think Putin had all that much flexibility on this. So right now, his two objectives. One is to neutralize, second is to denazify. And the denazification is a very tough thing. Without occupation, how are you going to do that? So it seems to me this situation is extremely difficult for Russia. And China is, of course, involved because these are two blocs emerging. China leading one bloc without calling anybody imperialist or anything. The thing is, these are two powerful blocs with Russia and China with a few other countries on one side. And so it's a dangerous moment. How do you think is going to get resolved, Rick, if you have any answers on that?
Well, what would be wonderful would be if Zelensky would meet with the Russian authorities and they were to agree to Ukraine being neutral, not being under the thumb of Russia or the US, being able to look both east and west. That would be great. Realistically, I don't think that's possible. I think if Zelensky, I've heard him described as a puppet. That you know, the hand behind him is the U.S. So if he was to try to do that, he would be gone. He would either be eliminated or replaced. There was even a story in the paper the other day about him being taken to the UK or taken out of the country. And meanwhile, we've got the U.S. has been busy there since 2015 and before with you know, training these militias. So you have an extremely difficult situation. I guess I am hopeful because Russia has a lot of experience, whether it was the Chechnya, the uprising and the fanatics in Chechnya, the conflict in Syria, and the failed you know, intervention in Afghanistan, which was a trap, and which makes me think they're very well aware of what the U.S. would like to have happen. So I guess I'm hoping that there will be enough of an outcry internationally to stop this, and that the outcry includes a demand that NATO either be disbanded or, you know, seriously constrained, because they've just been expanding over the last 30 years.
May I say something? Just one sentence. There was a conference in Munich where Zelensky went, and his protection was done by the United States. And United States openly says that, yes, we did it. I mean, this is not a conspiracy or anything. So we provide protection for another country's president. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Kit or Rich? You need to unmute. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, this is Rich. I'm going to hand it over to Kit, and when she's finished, I've send it back to me separate. I just want to let you know we're having trouble getting in, being recognized, and whatever, both of us. So we've had our hand up down there at the other place where my hand goes up. So I don't know what's going on, but we've been down here for about 20 people. Pass it over to Kit.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for doing this emergency program, because this has definitely been weighing on our minds quite a bit. I want to say that if we're being monitored by entities like Google and other platforms, that we may want to think about switching to Elon Musk's Signal, which encrypts people's conversations. But anyway, especially long distance. And also, I had read something that the satellites are now focused on Ukraine. I also want to confirm that Facebook does ban RT, and they had put out a warning about people trying to access that and having suspicious activity on their website. Another thing I want to mention is that all oil stocks are going up, and as we know, gas prices too are going up. We know that the U.S. wants access to the oil, and that the U.S. lost its access for oil through the Afghan war, losing that. We know that the U.S. military is the #1 consumer of oil and the #1 polluter, which contributes to global warming. The U.S. wants access to the Arctic for military purposes, and this had been mentioned in earlier sources that I'd read about the environment. So as the ice melts in the Arctic, this will make it more of a problem for Russia, because the U.S. wants to be able to enter that northern region where the Arctic is Russia's northern coastline. That's my comments. Thank you. Here's Rich.
Go ahead, Rich.
Okay, so I wanted to take what Kit was saying. I want to take it a little further. I think what she says is great, but we've both been kind of trying to find everything we can on Ukraine, Russia, NATO, blah blah blah. You know, like everybody else, that goes looking for this stuff, when this happens. Since it's been said so clearly earlier that our news sucks. I mean, it's just not objective, and it's not allowing in many different ways a robust discussion about the history of Ukraine, Russia, NATO, etc. So I want to look at, so I'm reading this thing about Russia, and it's talking about how big the country of Russia is territorially, geographically. It's the largest country in the world. It's by far. It's got huge, not just oil and gas resources, all kinds of stuff that they haven't even tapped out yet. They probably have a good idea where things are, but I'm just saying, we always say lightweight, but it's true. Follow the money. Okay, so why does the U.S. have such an interest in totally negating Russia? Just to get them down on their knees where they're begging us for business, whatever, and so they've not only has the USSR been, partly through internal, but I'm just saying, not only have they been decimated and separated, which allows this surrounding of Russia by NATO, but also I think not to underestimate the U.S.'s, I don't know what the right word is. It just thinks, the government, the military thinks that since they're the single power, the power of all powers in the world now, that they still have life ahead of them, instead of falling into not the trap, but the consequences of long-term monopoly capital, all that. We're seeing the loss of power by the U.S. in the world, and I think they're desperate to maintain their authority or ability to do whatever they need to do with any country in the world. And the only countries that can really stop them are Russia, still, even though they lost the former USSR. That doesn't mean they don't still have relations with all those countries or want to have relations with them. And I don't personally think that it's Putin's power thing, because he's now a, quote, capitalist. Russia does not yet have a true capitalist economy. We know what that is because we do have one. We're saturated here. It doesn't matter where you look. Somebody wants a nickel or a dime from you, or your entire bank account if they could get it. Okay. But in Russia, all those, I hear you, all those institutions get developed under capitalism have not been really developed in Russia. They're starting, it's not looking good, but the people can come back at any time and just turn it over again. So who knows what's going to happen? But China, China, like I think back to Obama said, pivot to the east, pivot to China. We don't need to worry about all these other things. Those are going to fall apart by themselves, or we can keep our fingers in there, or whatever. But China is the future.
You've gone over your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Nina W. and then myself, and then because there are the other hands I see are all people who've already spoken. Nina.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. We can.
Okay, let's see. Well, I just was going to say that, and this is a different point of view, but point out that there's been a tremendous amount of, I've been following this, there's quite a bit of demonstrating in Russia, and Putin, if you are sympathetic to him, and I'm not, has been arresting people and putting them in jail en masse. And so I can't really think that it's a socialist paradise there, or maybe I'll just throw that out, And the other part was Zelensky has offered to not be in NATO. He did offer to be what he called unaligned, but he doesn't want to go to have this discussion. He would like to meet with Russia, he says. And I'm just saying what has been said, but but not in Belarus because, that was a launching pad for attack on the Ukraine. So that's what he says. So those are 2 points I'm making. And I guess it's pretty obvious that Putin doesn't tolerate free speech at all. So there you are. Okay, anybody want to comment? Go ahead.
Thank you, Nina. I'm going to make just a couple points. First of all, I personally believe that Russia is capitalist, and that a lot of my friends tell me that we need to support Putin because not every part of capitalism has been restored in the former Soviet Union. But as far as I can see, that's Putin's intent. And I think that it is a historically terrible blunder that Putin has made, for a terrible blunder that is going to cost the Russian people as well as the Ukrainian people, of course. And they have suffered so much in the last century already. And of course, I think that the main problem is NATO and what Rick pointed out. There was an interesting article in the Yahoo Finance that talked about, let me see if I can find it, 7 defense stocks you should buy. This was put out just before the invasion. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, L3 Harris Technology, Booz Allen Hamilton, Northrop Grumman, and Huntington Ingalls Industries. And then it goes on to say that those are the ones that are really going to profit from this this situation. Sorry, and everyone has pointed out some really good articles, and I just want to add that there was one in the People's World that I really thought was important, and that one is entitled, sorry, I have to find it, Russia Invades, but there are no good guys in the Ukraine war. And I would recommend that because it outlines a lot of the specifics around US military and the military industrial complex that are going to benefit, that are benefiting right now from this war. And finally, I too worry about what the American people are being told and the propaganda about that the only bad guys are the Russians. And I think it's really important to try to get the word out about who in fact is benefiting and why NATO needs to be abolished. And you may have heard about a struggle in Oakland, where I live, about closing schools there, and it's part of the privatization of public education that's going on around the country. And that's a direct link. Our schools don't have enough resources because the military industrial complex keeps on growing and keeps on benefiting from US instigated wars like the one we are now seeing. I'm going to call on Bill Doors next because Norma asked him a direct question, and maybe that's why he put his hand up again. Bill, and then I'll set another cue. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to respond to that, but also I have to say on the question of democracy, the Svoboda Party, the right-wing neo-Nazi party, sits in the Ukrainian parliament. Is a big force in the state. They were in the cabinet. All communist parties in Ukraine are banned. I was there when that happened, the first time that happened. Then in Russia, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation is the second largest party. It has 57 seats in the Duma, and it was they, not Putin's party, who sponsored the resolution calling on Russia to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk. I think their statement on the top of their website is very worth reading. Yes, anti-war demonstrators have been arrested in Russia, but plenty have not been. Has anybody here not been arrested in an anti-war demonstration? I sure have. Russia is a capitalist country, is a bourgeois democracy, like the US, but it's not, I don't think it's the imperialist stage. And what I said was that the United States is at war against economic development around the world, and particularly the economic bloc that includes China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Syria. It's because the problem that capitalism is facing is not, imperialism faces is not, imperialism is monopoly capitalism, and the monopoly, the problem is not a shortage of resources, it's too much. They're trying to stop the gas from Russia to get to Europe. the war in Syria is blocking Iranian gas from getting to the Mediterranean. They're trying to seize the straits in Yemen to control those, to control the access to the Suez Canal. It's a global war, and this is one battle in it, and it's been raging. And the problem is that since the Soviet Union dissolved, that didn't end it, it just intensified it. Until the 1970s, Europe got most of its energy from the Middle East and North Africa, which was then mostly controlled by US corporations. In the 80s, they started trying to get gas from Russia, which came across Ukraine. It was all the Soviet Union. And I don't know if you folks my age will remember the lengths the Reagan administration went to sabotage the Ugal-6 pipeline that was bringing gas, Russian gas to Europe, Siberian gas to Europe. Since then, it's been a nonstop, since the Soviet Union fell, the US has been in a nonstop war to seize back control of the world's energy resources. I think that's, what's going on here.
Thank you, Bill. So we're starting a new queue of people who have already spoken. I don't see anyone else who has not spoken yet. So Jean, followed by Yusuf, followed by Janet. Go ahead, Jean.
Okay, thank you. And I really appreciate what everybody's been raising here. I just have a couple points. First of all, I did log into RT. I have Sonic TV that only exists in parts of Oakland and so on. So just FYI. Linked into that is, speaking of bad TV and bad news, check out Democracy Now! Their section on Ukraine is horrible. So just for your information. And third, many of us know Michael Parenti, who was kind of a mentor back in the day. And I remember what he said up at the Seattle demonstrations. He said, there's only one thing that US imperialism has ever wanted, and that's everything. They want all the steel, they want all the oil, they want all this and that, and we should give them nothing. So I just want to, Michael Parenti still as good and as fresh as ever. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, Yusuf.
Thank you. Yes, and broadly, I agree very much with Bill Doris. Putin is definitely, and Putin's party is definitely not a communist or socialist. It represents a section of the bourgeoisie, Russian bourgeoisie, that's not entirely dependent on or seeks to be not entirely dependent on imperialism, and what the U.S. glorifies as the opposition which is a minority, are those that seek to tie Russia to imperialism. You don't have, one has to think dialectically, you usually don't have just good guys and bad guys. It's more often the good, the bad, and the ugly, and others. And I think this is much the case here, where the division of United Russia, Putin's party is not the Soviet Union, but a more of a Russian nationalist viewpoint. They say this quite clearly, and in that respect, the Communist Party and people like me stand opposed. Of course, I'm not in Russia. It's not our duty to tell the Russian people what to do. And it's not the duty, and we shouldn't have the US police it. So bear this in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Janet, followed by Norma, Richard W., and Raj. Go ahead, Janet. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So first, I have Sonic as well. I switched from Comcast, so it's not my being blocked is not my internet provider. It's I don't think, but in any case, whatever. I've been blocked, and so moving on from that, I did mention this article that I wanted to post, which is titled "Ukraine has agreed to hold talks with Russia," and it's the RT article. And I mean, Rick, you were saying that that's one of the things that you think needs to happen. And in this article, it says, Russia said on Sunday that after some back and forth, Ukraine agreed to dispatch a team to Belarus for talks to end the Russian military campaign in the country. Kiev confirmed the planned talks in Gomel region, which is close to the borders of both Russia and Ukraine. Russian chief negotiator Vladimir Medinsky told reporters. Anyway, it goes on. Then I wanted to mention that as far as NATO is concerned, NATO has requirements to add states, and it requires a unanimous vote. That's one of the things, membership. And there are other requirements. There's a document that was a study in 1995. Anyway, if you Google membership in NATO, you can learn more about what that involves, although whatever the US, anyway, I'll just stop there on that. And then I want to close with bringing up what can we're talking about this situation and our concerns, but what can we actually do? We, meaning the people, the American people, let's say. And I've been seeing actions that have been planned by like Code Pink, Roots Action, David Swanson, and the World Beyond War, saying Russia out of Ukraine, NATO out of existence. So, Rick, if you wouldn't mind commenting on that, what can we do other than talk about it and educate people? Thank you.
Rick, did you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to comment right away to Janet. Next week, there was a very good webinar this past week on Tuesday night with a lot of great speakers, Ajamu Baraka and Medea Benjamin and many others. And there was an agreement that next week is going to be a week of action for no war with Russia and against NATO expansion. And so I think there'll be word going around about that. So supporting that would be one thing that's important. To my mind, the key message needs to be that the source of the conflict is U.S. militarism and NATO expansion, and as Sharon was saying, that ties directly into the breakdown in the United States infrastructure, the education, all of the thing, the number of homeless people, the healthcare crisis. So many things are hurt by our military budget, which is something like $2.25 billion every day of the year. So I think that's one thing that's important. In terms of keeping up with information, a couple of sources that I recommend checking out that many people don't know about. One is southfront.org, and the second one is moonofalabama.org. The latter site, or well, the former site, Southfront, is by an international team of volunteers and people who are producing videos. You can find a lot of videos there that are quite amazing. They've been covering the Syria conflict a lot, but there's videos from Ukraine right now. Moon of Alabama is a very good analyst, and he it's basically a one-person show, but it's good. He's a very sharp analyst, as I say. To my mind, what's driving this? Why is the U.S. so hell-bent on threatening Russia and trying to bring about change with Russia? A lot of it has to do with if we think about what would happen if Russia became stronger and allied much more with Europe. Europe would not need the United States so much. Europe would not be dependent on the United States. Economically, politically, the influence of Russia could be would have a huge impact on the global power of the United States. So I think that is a very real reason for this hostility and the actions, which of course are masked, but nevertheless they're there. So I guess I won't say any more right now.
Well, we are approaching 12:30, but we started 20 minutes late. So I think I'm going to suggest as the chair that we continue for at least another 15 minutes. Yeah. And I would like to rearrange the queue a little bit because there are two people who haven't spoken at all. And I'm going to ask Mark and then Richard F. to speak and then go back to the queue that I had. Go ahead, Mark.
Good afternoon. Sorry, I'm a little late here. I had to give a talk earlier this afternoon, but anyway, Adolf Hitler once said, "Borders are made by man and changed by man." You are in an area of the world where the borders have been changing many, many times. You can't tell me there aren't Ukrainians that want part of Poland back. You can't tell me there aren't Poles that want some of Ukraine back. You can't tell me that there are Germans that don't want East Prussia back. You can't tell me that there aren't Mexicans who come across the border who want Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Colorado, and Utah back. I said that at a talk one night. Some lady piped up, "Good, give them Texas." It's amazing here how we seem to forget history. And I say that because, tell this to Americans because they don't know. Adolf Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. The Poles invaded the Bolshevik Russia in 1919. The Germans invaded Russia in 1914. Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812, and it's usually through the same place, what we call Poland and Ukraine. That's the causeway in from the West. And don't think Putin doesn't understand this. And China, who else understands this too well enough is China. They don't want to see NATO spreading east either. So who are they going to back here? They're going to back Putin, and they're going to back him till they're going to fight that. They're going to fight this too to the last Russian. But the idea here is, and I think Putin wants at least go up to the Dnieper River. If he can cut Ukraine in half, that makes Western Ukraine a rump state. His wish list would probably get him up to the Polish border. But his objective here is to wreck Ukraine as a viable state. That's the object of the exercise. And I think what happened here when Blinken canceled the meeting, at the behest of the Bush administration on Tuesday to meet with Putin on Thursday, the plans the Russians had were already in place. I think that moved the invasion up at least 2 days because they need these days because in March, the thaw sets in and the tanks are going to have a tougher time running on soft ground than on hard ground.
Thank you. Richard F., you're next. Go ahead, Richard. You're on.
Okay. Yes. This issue has so many dimensions to it, and one can only focus on one at a time. I want to just talk about the domestic thing in the United States. Somebody talked about a crisis like this, exposes where different people are at. Somebody talked about Pacifica Radio, and it's really, the desertion of Pacifica Radio from the progressive camp in this situation, and it's really the whole liberal pacifist complex in the United States has now been exposed as impotent, and we see that also among the general liberals, among the general progressives. Whether it's Bernie Sanders or Murphy or AOC or Barbara Lee, they're nowhere around. They're all complaining about Russian aggression. A friend of mine follows these pundits who are experts on various issues, Black Lives Matter, food, the environment, and they've all suddenly become pundits on Ukraine, on the terrible thing about Russian aggression in the Ukraine. So these are people who all get their money from big foundations and the big capitalists. But we're seeing this exposure of these so-called progressive elements for what they really are. They rush back to the people who are paying them. So I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Let me call on Gulden, and then I promise I'll go back to the queue of people who've spoken before. Gulden, you're next.
Hi, thank you, Rick, for the presentation. Actually, U.S. is attacking from multiple fronts, not only using the NATO forces. U.S. attacks started on the funding the paramilitary and not neo-Nazi forces within Ukraine, like decades before. And we were talking about dark forces in the United States. I believe Biden's are included in these dark forces because Hunter Biden, when he was getting like millions of dollars from the Burisma, the energy company from Ukraine, in Ukraine, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden visited Ukraine about 6 times since 2014, forcing the Ukraine presidents not to take forceful reaction against the protesters in the streets. So Biden's openly, including the Burisma company, openly funded neo-Nazis and the paramilitary forces in Ukraine. So this is one of the fronts that U.S. is attacking to Ukraine and Russia.
Okay, thank you, Gulden. Okay, Norma, you're next, followed by Richard W., Raj, and Jean.
Let's see. The thing that I got lost trying to figure out was to tell people Putin is being made into a monster. I suggest as much as possible, although it's a great impossibility, for us to respond when that kind of accusation is made, and to talk about, yes, it's monstrous to try to feed all the people, to try to house all the people, etc., all the benefits that are being provided to the people in Russia by the policies that are headed by Putin at this time, and that came from the 100 years old struggle to build socialism. Building socialism makes them socialists, as has long been defined by one of our stellar members. And that's true of many nations throughout the world that have tried desperately to provide well for their people, the opposite of what's going on in the imperialist countries. And imperialism is not, for example, lending funds or building roads at low cost, at possible cost to countries around the world. The Belt and Road is not a thing that's going to obligate nations throughout the world where China is assisting tremendously in an opposite way to the way the United States has gone in and invested. One of the things the United States did was to help bomb the European countries and then have to establish a Marshall Plan that utilized US-based companies and lending, which got to be impossible, as we know. World Bank has done that. And Russia has not been imperialist. It has tried, like anything, to protect itself from its border countries that were, as you know, more anti-Semitic even than Germany. It was not reaching out to take control of the world, although it wouldn't have minded seeing socialism spread farther and farther around the world. That's imperialism. The United States behavior of acquiring countries, Alaska and Hawaii, etc., Mexico, well, the southern United States, those are imperialism.
Thank you. Richard W., you're next.
Hey, I'm unmuted. Okay. I had a couple of observations here. I'm sorry to say that Mark is gone. He'd appreciate this. One of the things that came across my attention was that something that apparently something called Dark Eagle has been deployed to Poland. I believe it was to Poland. Now, what Dark Eagle is it's a U.S. Right at this point, I think it's more like a prototype of a hypersonic missile. And it being sent to Poland is very threatening to Russia in the sense that the flight time from Poland to Russia is literally in the minutes. Hypersonic, it goes 5 times the speed of sound at a minimum. We are actually behind the Soviet Union, the Russia in that case. Anyways, the other thing I wanted to bring up is that the role of Dick Cheney, President Dick Cheney, And he basically gave voice. I know it was George Bush, but really the hand behind the throne here was Dick Cheney. But he gave voice to something that was really really unspoken of until it was verbalized, and that is the United States is a perpetual war. And we still, I mean, irrespective of what kind of administration is in power, we still adhere to those tenets of perpetual war in this country. So we need to face the facts that we are being prepared for war, that that we need to really address the elephant in the room here, which is indoctrination for permanent war. Thanks. I'll shut up.
Thank you, Richard. Raj.
Okay, thank you. So I want to address the issue, Bill Dorris' statement that it's the economics of imperialism versus where development is still taking place. So in a Marxist terms, he's a Marxist, but I would put it in another way of Marxist terms, is where the possibilities under capitalism are exhausted, which is the United States, whereas these possibilities of development, capitalist development, are not exhausted in certain parts of the world, rather than put it as socialism versus capitalism. So I think given that, those possibilities exist in China to less extent, but greater in Russia and India. But they're all capitalists, all three. The question here is, in this question, how is the working classes of the world, means ordinary people, means leaving out 4 or 5% of the top, are going to reverse this process? I mean, that's the bigger question. Immediate question is, I mean, Russia has no choice but to stop the further east expansion of NATO. I think that's the immediate cause. Mearsheimer says that, and I'm glad to see Mark Albertson come out, and I was missing him, make a sharp statement along that line. I agree with him. From Poland and from Romania, it's a little bit further than from the three Baltic states, Lithuania, Estonia, and the third one, I forget the name, and from Ukraine, where at Mach 5, it is about 6 or 7 minutes to reach Moscow. So they cannot afford it. I mean, there's no question about it that Russia has to neutralize Ukraine, and there's going to be bloodshed. So there comes all the humanitarians who just look at this, oh my God, so many people are dying. And I'm sad to see that happen. But the negative side of nationalism rising everywhere is the result of all wars. But behind that is the United States completely decayed capitalism. And really the challenge is upon us to replace it. So any thoughts on that, Rick? Mm-hmm. Or anybody else?
I actually need to go. I've got some other commitments today. So Sharon, can we wrap up in a few minutes or?
Well, absolutely. We're going to wrap up the official recording in just a couple more minutes. Let me say that the last three people on the queue will be. Oh no, Raj, you've already spoken. I'm sorry. The last two are Jean and Alan. And then we'll.
Can I ask Rick a question since I?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Actually, I have two questions. The first one is to Rick. It's kind of related to my second question. I looked at the Code Pink website, and it's been brought up in the discussion that they're sort of framing things in terms of NATO and Russia out of Ukraine. And can you comment on what you think about raising both of those issues? That'd be my first question. My second question is we have three Turkish comrades who are on the session today. And can you comment on the statement by the Turkish Communist Party condemning the Russian, I believe, condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Well, just very briefly, in response to Raj, I agree that the working class internationally have, the real question is how to make a change in the, that benefits the majority of the world's people. There's so much violence, there's so much poverty, and the poverty is getting, it's more and more visible in the United States now, whereas it was less visible in the past. But I think that the current conflict between the U.S. Regarding U.S. domination versus a multipolar world is really the crux of the issue. And I think if we can get beyond U.S. supremacy, there'll be a lot of improvement globally, as we've seen from believe we've seen it in China and China's investment in other countries and their building of infrastructure and so forth. Regarding Code Pink, I think the key thing is to emphasize that the conflict is caused by NATO. It's U.S. militarism and NATO expansion. I know that they are talking about diplomacy. Well, that's, it's easy to talk about diplomacy, but I think in terms of diplomacy, I think calling for Zelensky to sit down and negotiate a neutral Ukraine is a very reasonable, and that would be really the goal. I fear that Zelensky, as he's done over the last several days, he's going to promise to be there and to negotiate, and then he's not going to show up, or he's going to not be serious. Regarding, I have not seen the Turkish Communist Party statement. There was a Greek Communist Party statement that went around that was simply horrible. But I haven't seen the Turkish Communist Party statement.
Thank you. Jean.
Okay. Well, thank you. I just wanted to say when people about the so-called peace demonstrations inside Russia, anti-Putin. When I saw that, I Googled National Endowment for Humanities /Russia. And the NED have given hundreds of thousands of dollars inside to so-called peace groups inside Russia. So I think we need to, these are basically agents of U.S. foreign policy to stimulate counter-revolution and a counter-revolution in Russia. So just bear that in mind when you see anything about peace demonstrations or anti-Putin demonstrations inside Russia. That's all.
Okay, Mehmet, and then I'm going to suggest that we end the recording. Go ahead, Mehmet.
Thank you so much. What I'd like to say about the CP at Turkey's comments is that, yes, they do bring that NATO and the US is the #1 reason why this conflict is happening, and but they do condemn the war. So that has been their traditional approach. Peace, no matter what peace. This has been all the way from 1960s, 70s, their position. But I do find that in this, at general level, of course, I believe everybody here agrees that, if conflicts were to be resolved without war, without blood, that is what we want. But unfortunately, in this world, as Lenin has said many times, there are just wars and then there are unjust wars. When imperialism expands, that is not a war that we support, of course. But when there are peoples who do want to defend themselves against imperialist expansion, then we don't say we are against war because people are defending themselves. Were the Vietnamese wrong to fight against imperialism? Was Iraq wrong? Was Syria wrong for the invasion of? Are the Palestinians doing the wrong thing, fighting back an invasion and occupation of their country? So we do not, in general, say, "Oh, we don't want war. We don't want injustice wars, and we are against them." The question, of course, comes to how we see this war that's happening in Ukraine. Is it an expansionist war of Russia, or is it a defensive one? Once we resolve this, then I think we can start saying, okay, who is behind it? And I agree, it is the NATO for how many years since 2014 have been pushing to, like Rick said, Russia to walk into a trap. So Russia has two options: whether to give up everything, surrender, give it up, or at one point, after 14 times, NATO has broken its promise. After the US officials have admitted and gloated over saying that we gave $5 billion, which is illegal in the United States. If any country was to put $5 billion inside the United States to change the regime, that is illegal. But we just smile and say, oh, yeah, we did that. It's great, and so on and so forth. But this is admitted. So when should Russia say, okay, enough is enough? So we have to decide, is this an expansionist? Because I've been hearing from the left a lot that all Putin is trying to do is go back to its czarist borders, and then he's envisioning this huge empire, and he's going to come back to the warm seas and take over Mediterranean and go to Asia. Maybe that's what he's thinking. But is this even possible in today's world? And why now? Why in Ukraine? And like many people say, well, Trump is Putin's friend and everything. Well, Putin could have done this when Trump was in power then, right? Why do it now? Because the contradictions have come so far, because 14,000, 15,000 people have been killed by Ukrainians attacking its own citizens, that somebody had to put a stop. And yes, we wish that this conflict would end, as Rick said, with a truly independent Ukraine emerging. But in this world, how far that's going to go, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording now.
Thank you. Thank you, Raj.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml@marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.